But actually, when we look at chronic illness...
Good afternoon, Earth. This is Adam Sturch broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico. Working on oil painting Ferris wheel. Alright, today we're going to start digging into the detail on this a little bit. We got the stars in place, most of the colors blocked in, all the little figures below the Ferris wheel in place. So I've mixed up a very light pinkish purple to start the highlights across all of the figures, which I think it will retain a similar tones, and on the lower figures as well for the highlights. Then we've got some alizarin crimson for the shadow side of the gondolas, and some turquoise to start in on the clouds, and if there's some time, we'll go from there.
It was 1-to-1, so for one man diagnosed, so was a woman. Pretty much the same in the U.S., maybe the women a bit more. But now the gender ratio is tilting such that in Canada now, 3.5 women are being diagnosed for every man. But something's happened over the last 70 years to create that. And the traditional model does not allow us to understand what may have happened. Now, by the end of the talk, if I forget to mention it, just ask me, please. But perhaps you'll find it yourself in what I will tell you, to explain that otherwise inexplicable phenomenon. So, again, the transaction between patient and doctor in Western medicine is, excuse me, the patient comes in and says, I got this symptom, please get rid of it for me. Or I got this disease, please get rid of it for me. And the doctor says, I'll do my best to get rid of your symptom, and I'll do my best to get rid of your disease, and if I can't get rid of it, I'll do my best to make you comfortable over there. Physically. That's basically it. But the question, does this disease have a meaning in my life? Does it somehow represent how I've lived my life, or how my life has unfolded since I was conceived, and maybe even how my grandparents lived their lives? That never occurs to us. And what I'm suggesting is that what I found, and not only did I find, but the evidence is incontrovertible, that in fact disease is not an accident, nor is it simply genetic inheritance or some external agent. Now take lung cancer. So the belief is that lung cancer is caused by tobacco smoke, right? And sure enough, 95% of people who get lung cancer are smokers. There's no question that smoking is a major risk factor for lung cancer. But it is not true to say that smoking causes lung cancer. It cannot be true to say that, because if it was the case, then everybody who smoked would get lung cancer. But most people who smoke do not get lung cancer. So smoking cannot be the cause, because if A is the cause of B, then every time you see A, you should see B. And if you don't, then A cannot be the cause of B. It might be a contributing cause, let alone the people that get lung cancer who don't smoke. So there's really something else going on. And that something else is what we need to be looking at today. So I'll read you some clippings from a Canadian newspaper called the Globe and Mail, for which I used to be a medical columnist some years ago. And this first article is by a woman who was diagnosed with breast cancer, and her husband, Ty, had another wife, the first wife, who died of breast cancer. And now Donna, the second wife, is diagnosed with it. And the doctor's name is Harold. And here's Donna's first-person account of her diagnosis. Harold, the doctor, tells me that the lump is small, and most assuredly not in my lymph nodes, unlike that of Ty's first wife, whose cancer had spread everywhere by the time they found her. You're not going to die, he reassures me. But I'm worried about Ty, I say. I won't have the strength to support him. Now, what do you notice? Anything, what's wrong with this picture? Yeah?
She's worried about him. She's concerned about his emotions.
Exactly. She's the one with this potentially terminal illness. She's the one that's going to have to go through radiation, chemotherapy, possibly for sure surgery. And she's worried about how will I support him. Now this characteristic of automatic concern for the needs of others while ignoring your own is an absolute risk factor for cancer and chronic illness in general. For reasons I hope to convey to you today. The others I will read you are obituaries. Now, obituaries are fascinating because they tell us not only about the people who die, but also about what we value in one another. And what we value is exactly what kills us. Sometimes. In fact, you heard the expression, the good die young. And they do. They do. The good often die young. And then everybody goes to their funerals, and hundreds of people are weeping about what wonderful people they were, and how kind they were, and how giving they were. And they don't get it, but that's what killed them. This is not to say that kindness and giving kills us, but there's a distinction, which I hope to make clear to you. Anyway, so these obituaries then are about people who died with cancer in their 50s in most cases. This is a physician in Toronto. Never for a day did he contemplate giving up the work he so loved at Toronto's Sick Children's Hospital. He carried on his duties throughout his year-long battle with cancer, stopping only a few days before he died. Now, if a friend of yours is diagnosed with cancer, would you say to her, him, hey, here's what you do. Go back to work tomorrow. And not for a moment stop to consider your life or what this might mean. And all the while receiving treatment, chemotherapy, whatever's going on with you, just keep working every day and keep going until you drop. So this automatic identification, this rigid and compulsive identification with duty, role, and responsibility is the second major factor for chronic illness, risk factor for chronic illness. The next obituary is about a woman aged 55 who died of breast cancer. The obituary was written by her husband, a very appreciative husband, who writes, in her entire life, she never got into a fight with anyone. The worst she could say was phooey or something else along those lines. She had no ego. She just blended in with the environment in an unassuming manner. Now I know that many of you have partners, spouses, sometimes you wish that they would blend into the environment in an unassuming manner. But the fact is that what this woman lacked was the capacity to say no, to get angry sometimes in a healthy way. And so that suppression of healthy aggression is a significant risk factor for cancer and chronic illness. And I'll read you one more. This is almost, you might think I made this one up, but I didn't. Another physician who died of cancer, Sidney his name was. Sidney and his mother had an incredibly special relationship, a bond that was apparent in all aspects of their lives until her death. As a married man with young children, Sidney made a point to have dinner with his parents every day, as his wife Rosamond and their 4 kids waited for him at home. Sidney would walk in, greeted by yet another dinner to eat and to enjoy. Well, look at that one. How are you going to enjoy another one? Never wanted to disappoint either woman in his life, Sidney kept eating 2 dinners a day for years, until gradual weight gain began to raise suspicions. And this is in an obituary to show what a great guy Sidney was. He suffered from 2 terminal beliefs. One is that he was responsible for how other people feel. The second is that he was never disappoint anybody. So these, and I'm not laughing at these people. If I'm smiling at all, it's about the naivete of these beliefs. That this automatic regard for the needs of others while ignoring your own. This rigid and compulsive identification with duty, role, and responsibility. This inability to express what you really feel about things. The need to fit in. This fear of disciplining others is belief that you're responsible for how other people feel. Now, I will tell you how these factors actually lead to illness, but the example I always give, because it's so vivid, is that of ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. This is this mysterious condition in which the nervous system basically just dies. The motor nerves that activate the limbs and the trunk, or the muscles of swallowing or speech, becomes paralyzed. And death is usually due to respiratory failure. It's terminal in virtually all cases, and most people die within very few years of diagnosis. And again, we don't know the cause. But I think we don't know the cause only because we're not looking. So a woman came to me for a second opinion some years ago. She was a teacher and a vice principal, and she found that she couldn't hold the pen at some point in her hands because her fingers just wouldn't grasp it. And she also began to experience difficulty walking. And this is some months before she came to see me. By the time she came to see me, she'd been diagnosed with ALS. She wanted a second opinion. Now, she'd been diagnosed by a world expert in ALS, and it was clear that that was the condition, all right. But when I got the history, it got very interesting. When this began to happen, she didn't go to a doctor. What she did was she got up at 5 o'clock every morning, because it took her a long time to get dressed. And then she would get herself to school early, and then, grasping the chalk in her clenched fist, she would scrawl the day's lesson on the board for the students. She would work the whole day, stay up late the next night preparing the next day's lesson, and repeat the performance the next morning for months until she could literally no longer walk. And that's when she first went to seek medical help. Now, it turns out that nobody with ALS is any different. That all the cases of ALS I ever saw in palliative care, or all the people I interviewed, or anybody I ever read about, same characteristic. This refusing help from others. And I can do this myself, and I need to do it myself. In writing this book, when the body says no, and this is the Canadian version of it, it's not what the American version looks like, but it's the same text. I interviewed a lot of people with different illnesses. I reviewed my own cases, and I looked at the medical literature. So it turns out there was a study done at Yale University Medical School on people with ALS. And here's what they found. They said, hard, steady work, let me just find this quote here. Yeah. These patients invariably evoked admiration and respect from all staff who came into contact with them. Characteristic was their attempt to avoid asking for help. Hard, steady work without recourse to help from others was pervasive. They seemed to have been habitual denial, suppression of fear, anxiety, sadness. Most expressed the necessity to be cheerful, and so on. In other words, exactly what I found in my experience with ALS patients. And then what I also did is I looked at the biography of famous people who I knew had certain diseases. So I looked up Gilda Radner, the comedian, and her ovarian cancer. Looked up her biography. Looked at the biography of Betty Ford and her breast cancer. Looked at the biography of Lou Gehrig and his Lou Gehrig's disease, which is ALS. Lou Gehrig, for the younger of you, being a famous baseball player who was a star with the New York Yankees in the 1930s and I think early 40s, whose record for a number of hits was only broken a couple of years ago by Derek Jeter of the Yankees. And who set another very famous record, though. Does anyone remember what that was? Consecutive games played. He never missed a game. And it turned out it's not that he was never injured. At one point his hands were x-rayed and it turns out that his fingers had been fractured 17 different times. And his teammates described him as grimacing like a maddened monkey in agony as he fielded the ball, but he still never missed a game. Or he had a flu, and he would still play. And on the other hand, when a young teammate of his, a rookie, got sick with the flu and was unable to play, and the manager was very upset with the kid, Gary said, "What are you talking about? He's got a flu, he can't play." And Gary took the kid to his own home, where he lived with his mom. His mom put the rookie into Gary's own bed, Lou slept on the living room couch, while his mother nursed his kid back to health, but he never missed a game until he could no longer drag himself around the baseball diamond, and they said he was the nicest guy in the world. And I'm saying that that's why the illness. When there's a rigidity in our emotional responses, and a rigidity that we impose on ourselves, that results in rigidity of our nervous system, because you can't separate the mind from the body. And I'll talk to you about that in more detail. The question now is, if I develop this perspective, am I blaming the patient? And there was a very famous essay by Susan Sontag, Cancer is a Metaphor, and she had breast cancer. I think it was breast cancer, but cancer anyway. And she just absolutely militantly and even with some degree of hostility rejected the idea that there's anything about the patient's life that accounts for the disease. And she thought that was blaming the patient. And this blaming the patient is what's brought out as the counter to the case that I'm making here today. Well, the fact is we're not blaming anybody, because what happens when we look at the lives of these people? So the school teacher I told you about, when I got her life history, began with an adoption. She was an adopted child. And shortly after she was adopted, the adopted mother gets pregnant, which, by the way, is not unusual. And it tells us something about infertility and stress. When you're striving for something and you're totally attached to it, and then you let go, guess what? It happens. Not the first time in life that we would have learned that lesson. Anyway, the adopted mother gets pregnant. You can imagine what the story is from there. The story is that the adopted child never feels that she's as welcome to exist as the biological child. So she compensates by suppressing her needs and by making herself no trouble at all for the parents. Now they will perhaps accept her. The problem is that those early coping patterns then become our personalities. And when we think of the personality and we think we are the personality, we're not the personality. The personality is who we're not, actually, very often. And let me read you a quote here from an article from the journal Pediatrics, which is the official journal of the American Pediatric Association. This came out 2 years ago. Now, they're not talking about what I'm talking about, because I don't think they have that vision exactly. But they are talking about what I'm talking about, except maybe they don't know it. But here's what they say. Growing scientific evidence demonstrates that social and physical environments that threaten human development because of scarcity or stress can lead to short-term physiological and psychological adjustments that are necessary for immediate survival and adaptation, but which make up a significant cost to long-term outcomes in learning, behavior, health, and longevity. In other words, the way we adapt to early environment helps us survive early environment, but then it exacts a cost later on. So this woman adapted to her environment by suppressing herself so as not to make trouble, so as she'd be more accepted. Basically, it's her substitute for being loved. The trouble is that when we adapt those coping mechanisms early in life, we can't let go of them. Because we're not even aware. We think that's us. And the analogy is something like this. Imagine that you are on the North Pole in freezing cold or below freezing cold, and you put on a heavy fur coat, which will save your life. But then imagine that you're transported to the equator, still wearing that coat. That coat will not kill you. Help you survive in one environment, kill you in another. It's the same with these early coping patterns that we adopt. And so that virtually all problems that we face later on in life are as a result of these early adaptive patterns that we had to willy-nilly adapt, and we didn't even adapt them consciously or knowingly, which makes it all the more difficult to let go of them. But we're still stuck in them. So as one particular writer says, it's a question of redeeming our life from our history. Redeeming our life from our history. Because our history becomes our life until we consciously realize that no, we may have a choice in the matter. The child has no choice in the matter. Now what happens when you look at Lou Gehrig's life? Lou Gehrig's father was an alcoholic. Now, those of you that may have grown up in homes with alcoholism, what happens in the child-parent relationship in such homes? Anybody can, sorry? But how does the child adapt? The child becomes the parent. That's called the parentification of the child. It's a role reversal. And that role reversal invariably results in pathology for the child later on. But that's how they survive. And so Gehrig's father was an alcoholic, and Gehrig became the caretaker to her mother, and that meant to his mother. And that meant never, ever saying no, and always being quote-unquote responsible. And that's why he never missed a game. It's no great achievement not to miss a game when you got a flu. The achievement is to stay home. In Canada, there's a very famous example of this. He's a national hero. Some of you may have heard of him in the US, although we tend to hear a lot more about you guys than you hear about us in general. His name is Terry Fox. And Terry Fox was a teenager who had developed bone cancer in his leg, and his leg had to be amputated below the knee. And Terry then decides, I think 17 or 18, I'm not sure how old he was, Terry then decides to, maybe a bit older, to run across the country, to jog across the country with his prosthesis as a way of raising awareness of cancer. Halfway across the strip, and there's this iconic image of this young guy, curly hair, determined expression on his face, running along the Canadian highway with his metal leg. And of course it became a national cause. And then, about halfway through his journey, turned out the cancer had come back. Now Terry is a Canadian icon, and he's like a saint, and certainly an admirable person for his courage and determination. But is he an example to follow? Does anybody actually believe that the return of his cancer was unrelated to the stress he put himself under? And I don't know what his early years were like, but I'm pretty sure I can tell. So we're looking at adaptations here. And in the book I give an example of myself doing this. Like this is very general. We all do this to one degree or another. So in this example, I'm visiting my mother in the nursing home. My mother had muscular dystrophy, a genetic disease that runs in our family. And so she was unable to move by the end of her life. She was mentally very with it, emotionally strong, physically disabled. So I'm visiting her, and that afternoon, as I walked down the hall in the nursing home, I have a bit of a limp. And I have a limp because that morning I had had arthroscopic surgery to remove a torn cartilage from my knee, which I incurred by jogging on cement. And it used to hurt, but as a physician, I never learned the possible connection between pain and tissue damage. And so I continued to jog on cement until I did the surgery. So that afternoon, I have a bit of a limp. Except when I walked into my mother's room, the limp completely disappeared. And I walk into the room with a perfectly nonchalant gait, greet her, we have a visit, I walk out, shut the door, and start limping again. Now what was I doing? What was I doing? Protecting my mother from knowing about my pain. Now here's the deal. My mother was 78 at the time, I was 54. My mother had survived the genocide of the Second World War, the death of her parents in Auschwitz. She survived the communist dictatorship in Hungary, the Hungarian Revolution in 1956, emigration to Canada when she was 38 with 2 adolescent boys, the birth of a new child in a new country when she was nearly 40, learning a new language, making her a new home in an utterly different culture, and all that. The death of my father subsequently. Do you think she needed to be protected from the fact that her middle-aged son had a bit of a limp the afternoon of arthroscopic knee surgery? You know? So what was I doing? Well, I'll tell you what I was doing. What's that? I did, but the question is why? Why did I do that? And she did not need that. She did not need me to put her first. What's that? It's an adaptation, absolutely. And here's the deal. So if you read my books, you'll notice that I was born in Budapest, Hungary in 1944 to Jewish parents. And this is 2 months before the Germans occupy Hungary. So 2 months before the genocide descends upon the Jews of my country. So I'm 2 months old at the time, and the Wehrmacht, the German army, marches into Budapest. The next day, my mother calls the pediatrician and says, "Will you please come and see Gabor, because he's crying all the time." And the pediatrician says, "Of course I will come, but I should tell you, all my Jewish babies are crying." So Almas, A.H. Almas, the California-based spiritual teacher, who I think was speaking here this weekend, he says in one of his books, the child is very open and can feel the pain and suffering going on in its immediate environment. The child is aware of its own body and can also feel the tension, rigidity, and pain in the body of the mother or anyone else he's with. If the mother is suffering, the baby suffers too. The pain never gets discharged. So here's what happens. And this is really the core of what I'll tell you the whole day. The child has 2 needs. The child is an absolute need for attachment. Attachment being loved. I know we talk about attachment in the Buddhist sense, but that's not what I'm talking about right now. Right now I'm talking about the attachment relationship, that dynamic that draws us close to other people. And without that dynamic, without our brains being wired for attachment, we would not survive, because simply we're so helpless and utterly dependent as infants. So without somebody taking care of us and us being cute enough that they will want to, which is why as babies we tend to be so cute, you know. And some of us as adults go through life still trying to pretend to be cute. So it's a way of trying to get some love. So without attachment, we don't survive. So that's an absolute need. It's non-negotiable. We have another need. That need is for authenticity. Authenticity, auto the self. An automobile is a self-propelled mobile. So authenticity has to do with being our true self. And being a true self is not some abstract
Oh shit, we got 20 seconds left. Still watch this. I gotta order my battery, but I can't afford to right now. So if anybody needs some art, please hit me up. But anyway, that's it for the moment. Thank you for watching this Adam Sturch Broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion, Taos, New Mexico, working on oil painting Ferris wheel. Yeah. There you have it. We got 5 seconds. Have a good day, Earth.
So from the evolutionary perspective, being in touch with the self.